Hi, I'm Noreen Lace, and this is Joe Rousseau, author of Tourists in the Country of Love. And specifically, we are talking today about Maurissa Takes the F Scale. Hello.
Hi, Noreen.
Hi. I wanted to start by asking you what your inspiration for this story was. Joe Takes the F Scale. What was your inspiration?
Well, I was in a class about the Frankfurt School in general, and it always interested me about, the dark part of governments or whatever. And the F scale was designed to detect pre-fascist tendencies. So this was after World War II when the German scientists were brought over and they devised a test to detect fascist tendencies. And so I began to look at that test and try to figure out how someone might go about answering those questions, building the scenario that's going to answer that question.
And this is right after, as you said, World War II, and there was the Cold War, and the House Un-American Activities Committee. There was this fear, the Red Scare. That's what the Red Scare, where the fear was there were communists in our country who, I don't know, what did they think? They were going to start trouble. They were going to try to turn people.
Right. And I think they probably had a lot of clues that might happen because the Communist Party at that time was growing in the United States. But people pointed at that time to the rise of labor unions as communist organizations. So by 1955, when McCarthy was in swing doing his thing in the Senate, unions were pretty well established by then. So yeah, that was all part of this. We can't let a Hitler or a Mussolini rise again.
Oh, okay. And I guess that's understandable, but from my research, and I saw this movie Trumbo. Are you familiar with that? Yeah, Trumbo. Seemed like the communist community at that time was really about equality in pay and working conditions, like you say, labor union. And so did our government have a different idea of what these communities were, or that was some of the communities, and some of the communities were really like communist, and I don't know.
Well, I think they thought they were being hyper vigilant. They were
the government.
The government thought they were being hyper vigilant and protecting the United States. I mean, still today, a lot is done in the name of protecting the United States. That's probably not so good. But, Joseph McCarthy, of course, thought he was doing a good thing, at least in the beginning. I don't know if he always did, but at least in the beginning, he thought he was doing a good thing. But there was definitely a scare where they thought that the communists were infiltrating everywhere, especially, the high profile cases that they wanted to display with the movie stars in Hollywood.
Yes. And some people, we should say, went to jail for their communist activities, lost their businesses. Let's see, companies turned over personnel records to the government, correct? So this was a really, and I think there really was fear in the American public that, as you say, a Hitler or a Mussolini, or that these groups might cause trouble. Yes? All right. So then let's talk more about Maurissa and the F scale. So you said right before we started, you said this story could take place at any time. Well, because it was the F scale, I was thinking it was around the 50s. And then I built up all this other ideology that was happening in the story, being around the 1950s, because having an affair then I feel like it meant something much more serious than it means now. I don't know if that's right to say, or if I'm saying it.
Yeah, no, I think your perception's correct. I mean, when I think of the story, I think of, late 50s, early 60s, somewhere around in there. Women were in the workforce, all secretaries, of course, and you didn't have the personnel office protecting you against aggressive bosses, that kind of thing. But, I felt Maurissa, obviously having an affair with your boss at lunch hour is not particularly a moral thing to do. And yet she's confronted, especially say in 1959 or whatever, but here she is confronting with an even bigger moral dilemma about is his wife onto them and what's to be done about it? Is she genuinely suicidal? And what's their response to that?
Yeah, which his response seems much colder than her response.
Yeah, so, he's got much more at stake. Alimony and things like that. He's got much more at stake than she does. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I see. I didn't think about that. I just thought he was being very cold. Now, and then Maurissa has to go to work and take this test, this F scale, which is supposed to judge if you're a fascist, correct? Yeah. Mm-hmm. If you might be a troublemaker, a communist, whatever those tests were for. Tell me why you chose the questions that you did and your thought process about her thought process.
Well, I believe there were originally on the test over 100 questions, but the test that I had about, 70 questions maybe. Oh. And I don't know why that is, but anyway, as I read through the questions, sometimes pretty immediately a scenario would pop into my head about how is it that you think about this question, and I think, maybe the reason it was never actually implemented was because it depends on what happened that week, how you would answer these questions, what your disposition is. I'm sure that some people would answer them thoughtlessly, but in my scenario, of course, Maurissa is very serious about trying to answer these questions in some thoughtful way and based on some value, some of the values that she had. So that's why I picked this particular question, is that scenario, Maurissa sitting there writing this test and thinking about this question. She had a period in her life where this was an important question to be asked.
I looked up the test now, and I remember you told me that it used to be 100, and I remember that you said it had been cut down when you saw it. Well, I saw it, I looked it up right before the interview, and there was only 30 questions. And there is a place that you can take the test and kind of, yes, and kind of judge for yourself.
How fascist you are.
How fascist you are. Okay, good. In the 50s, women were supposed to stay at home. It was after the war. They were supposed to be married. They're supposed to be homemakers, taking care of their kids. So Maurissa is out in the workforce. So maybe it's the late 50s, early 60s when women started looking for those kind of opportunities. And then she's having an affair, which in the 50s, I feel like, not that I'm saying it's okay at all, but I feel like it happens a lot more now than it did in the 50s. And I feel like back then it would have been a huge deal, a big shame on the woman, yeah. And probably not so much on the man. So again, that's why I placed it at that time period. And I had more going on in my mind about that time period. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think in the situation they were in, where, they're having this ongoing affair, it's been going on for a while, It's not the first time the wife finds out. She calls the mistress and confronts her and tells her, he better get home or I'm, going to kill myself. The husband and the mistress could resolve it by him dashing off. Maurissa, saying, I'm concerned about this woman. I want to call the ambulance. I don't know your address, but, I want to save her somehow. I mean, she is in some ways sort of redeeming herself. And she asks him, you don't know your own wife well enough to know if she would commit suicide? And he says, that's not the point. The point is my freedom. She can't do this to me. She can't intimidate me or blackmail me this way.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. And women, speaking of the wife, she had fewer choices too, especially if she was not in the workforce. It's not like she had a lot of opportunity to leave him. So this was her only power to threaten suicide.
Yeah, I think so. That's all she could think of to do to force him to confront this.
Yeah. So now let me ask you, how did Maurissa score?
Well, I don't know. I know how she scored on this one question. She felt like, yeah, it's true. People only look out for themselves. And I think she put herself in that category too. All of us, all three of us, were just looking out for ourselves. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, but she did want to help.
She did want to help.
But there was no way. She didn't have the address. She didn't know what to say. So it's kind of interesting. That's kind of interesting. So do you think that would be a communist tendency or a fascist tendency?
Well, I don't know. Theodore Adorno, I just thought it was.
we have to call him and ask him. Or take the test.
Yeah, I guess one of the reasons that this story couldn't be current is people would be up in arms. They would not take this test.
Well, true, but if you apply online, there's a couple places where you do have to take a personality test.
That's true. That is true.
Yeah. And so people do it because they need work. And then these personality tests, I think, are supposed to say whether they're honest or not, I assume, or whether they're flexible. I don't know. We're not really told what they're supposed to look for. We don't know what those tests or those answers or those statistics are actually being used for. So
yeah.
Wow. I think that's all the questions I have. Is there any last things you want to say about Maurissa, about the Taurus? Oh yeah, I wanted you to hold up your book, Taurus in the Country of Love. I love that book.
Yes. I love the cover too. Yeah.
Yeah, the cover is just really wonderful. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I would say in general, what I do try to write about is, so in the story, you have to have conflict, right? That's a given. You have to have conflict. So some people have murders and things like that. But my conflict, I think, is typically internalized. What does somebody do given a certain situation? And that always interests me.
Okay. I would say that's true about your writing. And again, I love your writing. But there is one story in there that has a murder, right? Is it the Love's Actuary?
Oh, yeah.
Did he murder someone? I guess we shouldn't ruin it for readers, but...
There is a death, and it's not a natural death.
Okay. Yes. Okay, great. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk with me today.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah.
Again, that was Jo Rousseau, author of Tourists in the Country of Love. Great title.